Hey, Richard, thanks a lot for being here to talk with us about hours of service. Richard is an expert on hours of service, and I'm going to hand it right off to you, Richard. If you could go ahead from the Department of Transportation themselves, if you could walk us through, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administrative perspective on hours of service. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Basically, I've been with the agency for 15 years now with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. I've been doing a lot of work on hours of service since I got with the agency. I've been involved with the rulemaking team on this latest iteration of the rule that we're going to talk about today. I want to make sure that I cover everything, and hopefully you can see my slides. I'm looking at them on my own screen here on my laptop, so I'm going to go through the slides and try to give an overview of the final rule that was published on June 1st of 2020. Going to slide number 2, we did publish the hours of service final rule on June 1st, 2020, as I said. And the important date to note on this slide is that drivers must not and carriers must operate under the new rule starting in September 29th, 2020, and not before. There's no voluntary compliance before that date. That's the hard start of September 29th, 2020 for the new changes. Basically, in the final rule, we finalized 4 changes to the current hours of service regulations for drivers, and these are all in Part 395 of our regulations. The 4 changes that we've done in the final rule is we've made changes to the short haul exception, we've made some changes to the adverse driving conditions exception, we've made some changes to the 30-minute rest break requirement, and probably the most complicated of the 4 is changes to the sleeper berth provisions. So those are the main 4 changes that I'm going to focus on today. I just want to give you a little bit of background as how we got to where we got to in publishing this rule before I get to the changes. Back in 2018, the agency had gotten a lot of feedback from carriers, from drivers, from Congress, from trucking industry advocates on the hours of service rules at that time. Our administrator got a lot of comments, a lot of feedback that the rules needed to be more flexible. One part of the rules, which I'm going to talk a lot about today, is the 14-hour what's called the 14-hour driving window, whereby when a driver's day starts, they have 11 hours of driving and 14 hours all told before they have to at least take 10 hours off consecutively. So we got a lot of feedback from industry that the rules were inflexible and that the 14-hour clock was always running and that drivers and carriers were running out of time, on their 14, and that they needed some flexibility. So that's kind of where this was for this latest iteration of the rule. We do have to do a cost-benefit analysis on every rule that we do within the agency, and this rule results in saving over $270 million, which will help create more jobs and strengthen the economy and the motor carrier industry. So we aim to come up, as I said, with rules that increase flexibility, but while maintaining safety on our nation's roads. That's the critical point. We're the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. We do not want fatigued operators of commercial motor vehicles out on public roads. That our primary mission is safety, even with these changes that I'm going to talk about today. Going on to slide number 4, and I'll go quickly through these. We always have to go through a process. I said back in 2018, the first step was an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, where we got over, and in that we did not really propose any changes to the rules. At that time, we basically asked a lot of questions whereby people can file comments in the docket. We didn't propose any changes at this point. We were trying to just get some feedback on areas, that we could possibly look at for amending the hours of service rules. Believe it or not, we got over 5,000 comments to that advance notice, which we had to analyze and review. That subsequently led to the 2019 Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, and I believe I have the dates on these, or the firm dates with the month and everything on the next slide. In the NPRM, we proposed changes in 5 specific areas to the hours of service provisions, one of which did not go forward based on our review of the comments and things, and I really won't go into that today. I'm only going to go into the things we changed. We got over 2,800 comments to that Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. So as you can imagine, it's a huge undertaking to go through all this, evaluate it, and then have to put together a final rule. Going on to the next slide, and again, if I don't get you, I believe that NPRM was August in 2019, but I can get those dates if anybody needs them later. So I really want to focus in on now what the final rule changed. And again, this was when we published it in the June 1st, 2020 Federal Register, which was only about a little over a month and a half ago. First one, as I mentioned, was the short haul exception. The short haul exception was the first of the changes, and as you can see on the slide, that is in section 395.1E1. And basically, we made two changes to this rule. And the short haul people are still subject to the 11 driving and all of the other regulations. We basically made two extensions for flexibility, whereby we allowed them to extend the radius from 100 to 150 air miles from the principal place of business. And we also extended the maximum duty period from 12 to 14 hours. So that now allows short haul drivers to return to the work reporting location within 14 hours as opposed to 12. And also we've extended the air mile radius from 100 to 150 air miles. I believe 150 air miles is 172.6 statute miles. So we've extended that. We did get some pushback on people wanting to not return to the principal place of business. We did not put that in the final rule. We said you have to go back to your home, your home base. So there we provided 2 bits of flexibility. What I really want to stress on that as well is that these folks that meet the short haul exception, as I said, are still subject to all of the basic hours of service rules. What it exempts them from, if they meet these conditions, is the 30-minute rest break requirement, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. And it also exempts them from having to fill out a record of duty status or use an ELD, which we'll get into a little bit here on the next slide. So, okay, and again, just on this slide, it just reiterates what I had just said. I do want to point out that we also changed this for passenger carrying vehicles as well, for buses. So they are also subject to these rules as well. I mean, and they've had the extension from 12 to 14 and from 100 to 150 relating to the short haul provisions. Again, people that are operating under the short haul would be they're mandated to keep the time records back at the principal place of business because they would be exempt from the logbooks, and those records have to be kept for 6 months back at the motor carrier's place of business. So that's those points. As it relates to the short haul also, I wanted to basically cover that the current ELD, the current electronic logging device requirements, if an individual meets the short haul for less than 8 days, the short haul requirements I just talked about, for less than 8 days out of any 30 days period, they do not have to have an ELD on the electronic logging device on the vehicle. That 30-day period is a rotating period. It's not a finite period. For example, when you get to day 31, you drop day 1 off the cycle and you continue to move from there on. So if somebody if went over the threshold of short haul for 8 out of 30 days, they are mandated to have an ELD on the vehicle. If not, they can continue to use paper rods for the days where they don't meet the exemption. As I said, the time records on the slide here must include the total time for the preceding 7 days, and all of these records, including short haul time cards and things, must be kept for 6 months. So keep that in mind as well. Going on to primary change number 2, this was we had some changes to the adverse driving conditions definition. And basically on this slide, we have the previous language on the left-hand side, which I won't read, but we have the new language on the right side. And basically the 2 changes were, we've now included the driver in the determination of unforeseen adverse driving conditions. We're not talking here about normal rush hour traffic or things like that. We're talking about things that were either unforeseen to a dispatcher at the time of dispatch or to a driver, and that we've now added the driver immediately before they begin their duty day when they start driving, or doing their pre-trip or whatever, or immediately before beginning driving after a qualifying rest break or sleeper berth period. And we'll get into those when I talk about the sleeper berth later. There's no definition of qualifying rest break, but there are 2 periods under the new provisions for sleeper berth. So immediately before either one of these, the driver would be able to make a determination, for adverse driving. Moving on to the next slide. Again, I stress the word on this slide of unforeseeable. These are unforeseeable events based on, prior to dispatch or after qualifying rest periods. And basically what we've done, the second part of the change is heretofore the drivers were only allowed 2 extra hours of driving on the 11. They were allowed 13, and passenger carriers were allowed 12 hours. They have 1 hour less of driving. What we've done in the new rule is we've extended the driving window for property carrying, whereby now the individuals receive an additional 2 hours on their driving window. So the 14 can be extended to 16, and for passengers it can be extended from 15 to 17. I won't go into all there's some differences with the passenger carrier on their on-duty limit versus the property carrying. Basically, the 14-hour window is a finite period. It can't be extended by other periods. But in this case, with the adverse driving, it can now be extended by 2 extra hours for 16 hours. So, and that would include, let's say, an accident occurred on the highway completely out of nowhere, and somebody was tied up on the highway and couldn't go anywhere, even if they were inching along in traffic or in the, while clearing up the accident. That time could be excluded from the 14-hour window as adverse driving. So, and as I said, it also now includes the role of the driver. I won't cover this one too much. This is just an example of if there was a gravel spill or something on the road, the driver had an hour left of driving time and an hour left in the driving day. It gives them, again, the additional 2 hours of flexibility. I will note at the bottom of the slide that while not required by regulation, we do suggest that drivers that run into these situations either annotate their logbook or their electronic logging device for the use of the adverse driving, because when if the driver is stopped at roadside or later in compliance reviews, it certainly helps when there's annotations about what happened, as opposed to somebody just saying, well, you used 2 extra hours of driving time or whatever. So we strongly encourage drivers to annotate their logs or their records of duty status. That was primary change number 2. Going to primary change number 3 is the 30-minute rest break requirement. And we basically have 2 changes here as well. Under the old rules, under the previous, the 30-minute break was tied to when a driver's day started. For example, when they went on duty, within 8 hours, they had to take at least a 30-minute consecutive rest break. Under the new rules, we've now allowed before I get into what we're allowing, the 30-minute break now is tied to the driving time. And it's not, I've said this a couple of times on prior webinars I've done, it's not consecutive 8 hours of driving, it's 8 cumulative hours of driving. So, for example, if somebody drove for 4 hours, took a short 15-minute break or whatever, and then drove for another 4 hours, they would still have to take another half an hour break at the end of that 8 hours, because that would be 8 hours of cumulative driving that wasn't broken up by at least a 30-minute consecutive break. So it's not just driving for 8 straight hours. It can be broken up by very short periods, but the individual would still have to take at least a 30-minute break. Secondly, what we've done with the changes is we've now included on-duty not driving time to suffice for the 30-minute break. And any combination of those 3 duty statuses, off-duty, sleeper berth, or on duty, can be used as long as it's 30 minutes consecutive for the new break. We've gotten questions on duty not driving can include things like fueling your truck or doing paperwork or any of those. Really the only thing that's excluded from being able to use in this break is driving time. Everything else can be combined in some combination to meet the 30 minutes. And again, remember, it's tied to the driving time. This is just a quick example. I believe both of the logs that are on the screen or on the slide are compliant. Before, as I said, it could only be off-duty, but now on-duty works as well. Both logs are compliant. And as I said, you can do a 10-10-10 with 3 different duty statuses, 10 minutes each, as long as it was consecutive time. So more flexibility here as well. And we've gotten questions about, for example, if somebody gets a roadside stop or roadside inspection, if they were there for 30 minutes with the officer having their truck inspected, that time could suffice for the 30-minute break under the new rules, as that's properly logged as on-duty not driving time. So we've also gotten questions about what's called yard moves. If somebody is, if an individual is yard jockeying trucks around a lot, as long as they don't take them out on a public highway, that time is also properly logged as on-duty not driving time. So all of that can be used for compliance with the new 30-minute break keeping in mind that all of this happens after September 29th of this year. This is really probably the biggest and most confusing part of the new rule, and I've done some webinars already and some training, and this issue, raises a number of questions and scenarios, but I'll try to explain it as best I can in the short amount of time I have. Heretofore, the individuals could only use the sleeper berth provision by splitting. They had to have at least one minimum period of 8 hours in the sleeper berth, and then they could pair that with a minimum of at least 2 hours, so the total was 10. The 2 hours didn't have to be in the sleeper berth. It could be off duty or sleeper berth or some combination, but you did have to have that firm period of 8 hours in the berth. Under the old rules, the only period that was excluded when you're counting up the 14 hours is the 8 hour period in the sleeper berth, and it could be excluded even if it's a standalone under the current rules, even if it wasn't paired up with anything. Under the new rules, we have now changed this where at least one period has to be 7 consecutive hours in the berth. The other period has to be at least 2 hours long. It can be off duty or in the sleeper berth 2 consecutive hours, and the total of those 2 has to be 10. So you could do 7 and 3. You can do 7 and 4. I mean, again, the minimum one period has to be in the berth. And keep in mind, these are minimums, not maximums. So there's no cap on the top end on how long you take off. The other key point is, which is on the slide, which is different than today's rules, neither of these periods under the new rules would count against the 14-hour driving window. So if you did a 7-3, and both of those periods would be excluded from the 14-hour driving window calculation. It's going to be very hard to demonstrate that without going through logs, which I'm not going to be able to do today without going through log books. But it does provide some, when I keep going back to flexibility, it goes, for example, if a driver got stuck at the loading dock, loading or unloading or whatever, a couple hours just sitting there, it gives them some new flexibility to use this time to either take a nap or go in the sleeper berth and not have this time, the shorter period, count against their 14-hour window. So once again, more flexibility. And again, we're really working through trying to explain this to industry, because it is probably the most confusing part of the entire rule, because there's a million different scenarios you can look at. I really don't want to go through these examples on there's a couple of log books there because it's going to take me too much time, but it's just a lot of different ways that these, as I said, that under the new rules, as far as explaining the calculations, just keep in your mind the one period has to be at least 2. The other period has to be 7, and the total has to be 10, with no maximums on the top end. Normally, when an individual takes a 10-hour consecutive break, even forgetting about sleeper berth, just 10 hours off consecutively, that resets. That's an automatic reset of a driver's 11 and 14 hours available. I'm not going to get into today about there's still the 60 and 70-hour rules, which are the weekly limits of driving and on-duty time, so none of that has changed, but I'm just, covering the changes in the rule today. So none of the 60 and 70-hour rules have changed, and all of that remains the same. The agency is working on a lot of stuff that we're going to have on our website down the road, a lot of resources, webinars, logbook examples, et cetera, as we get closer to September 29th, a lot of compliance materials, because this is a lot of changes, and it's a 4-month time from when the rule was published to get everybody up to speed. So trust me, we're working on putting together a lot of compliance materials at this point. Again, the key date being September 29th of 2020 for the implementation date. Full disclosure, and I've said this today, and I'll not the people on this webinar. Whenever we issue a rule, there's a 30-day period based on the rule or the statutes that groups can file either petitions for reconsideration or litigating the rule. They have 60 days to litigate the rule. We did receive some petitions for reconsideration on which was a 30-day window. We will be responding to those. As of to date, we have not received any litigation on the regulations. The time for that, I believe, is over in about a week. So just keep that in the back of your minds. We have to address all that. We have to address the petitions for reconsideration. But as we talk today, everything is moving full steam ahead towards September 29, 2020. We have to operate that, that the rule is going to go into effect, and we're trying to bring everybody up to speed before we get to that date. So I just wanted to bring everybody up to date on that. Last but not least, and then I do have a couple of other notes that I wanted to cover, and maybe we could have time for a question or two. This is the link. There's a link on the slide where we're going to have all that information I talked about, and a lot of the compliance materials. I don't have them in the slides, but I basically wanted to cover just for a minute or two because I know that the people that wanted me to do the presentation had mentioned these issues. I want to stress the importance of electronic logging devices. The rule initially was published back in 2015, and then there was some implementation timeframes up to 2017, and then I believe the automatic onboard recorders were grandfathered through 2019. So long story short, the landscape has changed. Most companies and drivers are now having to use electronic logging devices. We believe it gives a much more accurate depiction of what goes on out on the road as far as all of the different duty statuses and things and the driving time. And so that was a big game changer with ELDs, a lot of which led to some of the things that happened that I talked about today with the changes. Another thing is that I want to stress, and this was in my notes, nothing has changed as far as the violations and the critical and acute violations for hours of service rules or any other rules. These all factor into severity of weightings of drivers and carriers on their compliance, safety, and accountabilities or CSA scores. Trust me, we take safety very seriously at our agency, and the actions of the carriers and the drivers, we're out there if people are not complying with what these rules are, and I'm just talking about hours of service today. I'm just trying to stress the importance of, complying with the regulations. There's a whole book of regulations that I'm sure most are familiar with, and I'm only covering hours of service today, which is obviously is a huge issue. But I just want to stress the importance of safety and compliance and complying with what these rules are. And I'm passionate for safety. I have a passion for it, and I've been doing this for a long time, even prior to when I got with the agency. I came from the trucking industry on the industry side and some of the trade associations. So I take it very seriously, and hopefully I've given you a good overview. I know it's fairly rapid, but when we get some time afterwards, I can provide people with my email if they want to do follow up with stuff. So with that, I'll turn it back over, and if there were any other questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Richard, it looks like we don't have any questions at this time. I know that you are pressed for time, and I really want to say thanks for working through the technical difficulties that we experienced there, and for filling us in. It was a great slideshow. It was right on the point, and it's very timely. So thanks a lot for everybody in the Virtual Propane Expo. Thank you. We were getting just comments saying nice job, well done, thank you from the people in this session now.
Thank you, and let me leave you with this. I will forward to you guys my email, and then if you want to forward it out to the folks, that's fine as well. So that way they have it. Perfect.
Richard, thanks a lot. I know you got to run, so thank you very much from the propane industry to you. All the best, my friend, and thank you.
Take care. Thank you very much.
Take care now. Bye-bye.